All right, so today we're going to connect the dots between a 20th century national hero and an ancient story about greed and stolen land. It's a really fascinating look at how the abuse of power, it just echoes through history. So back in the 1920s, during the colonial period in Korea, there was this popular saying going around. At a time of, real national despair, these two guys, An Chung-nam the pilot and Buk-dong the cyclist, they were absolute symbols of hope, kind of like these glimmers of pride when there wasn't much else to celebrate.
So let's zoom in on the man in the sky, An Chung-nam. He was actually Korea's very first pilot. And his story? Wow. It starts with this incredible, triumphant flight. But as you'll see, it ends with a really tragic realization.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1922. The 3.1 independence movement had just been brutally suppressed, and this heavy sense of defeat is just hanging over all of Korea. So when this guy, An Chung-nam, a Korean who'd become a pilot over in Japan, comes back to fly over his own homeland, man, it was a huge monumental event. And I mean huge. A staggering 50,000 people gathered at the airfield in Yeouido, in Seoul, just to watch him fly. To put that in perspective, Seoul's entire population was only about 300,000 back then. That means literally 1 out of every 6 people in the city dropped everything to come out and see him.
So as dusk starts to fall, he takes off. He's circling the sky, dropping all this colorful paper to celebrate. And then he lands, safely, to this massive, roaring applause from the crowd. In that moment, he was an absolute national hero.
But here's the thing. There was a dark truth hidden right there, underneath all that celebration. The very runway he just landed on, it wasn't just some airfield. Up until 1916, that land was the livelihood for a whole community of Korean farmers. The Japanese colonial government had just taken it, forcibly seized it for a military airbase, gave them barely any compensation, and violently crushed anyone who dared to protest.
And this realization just completely shook An Chung-nam. Imagine that. You're being celebrated as a hero of your people, but you're standing on ground that symbolizes their violent oppression. That contradiction, it was just too much. It moved him to completely abandon his comfortable life. He packed up, left for China, and joined the independence movement. He decided to use his skills to fight for his country's freedom, and he ultimately died for that cause at just 29 years old.
So this whole story, An Chung-nam's, the farmers, it really brings up a timeless, fundamental question about power, right? To what extent can rulers actually use their power? I mean, when a ruler wants something, what are the limits? How far is too far?
And to dig into that very question, we're going to jump in a time machine and go way, way back, thousands of years actually, to an ancient story from the Hebrew Bible. It's a story about a king, a regular guy, and a piece of land that the king just had to have.
Okay, so here's the setup. You've got King Ahab. He sees this beautiful vineyard right next to his palace, and he decides, I want that. He goes to the owner, a guy named Naboth, and makes what honestly sounds like a pretty fair offer. He's like, hey, I'll pay you good money, or I'll even trade you for a better vineyard. But Naboth's answer is a firm, flat no.
Now you might think Naboth just being difficult, right? But he wasn't. See, he was upholding a really important sacred law. In ancient Israel, land wasn't just property you could buy and sell. It was seen as an inheritance from your ancestors, a sacred trust from God that you were actually forbidden from selling permanently. So for Naboth, this was a huge deal. He was choosing God's law over the king's command.
So what does King Ahab do? He gets so bent out of shape about this that he literally goes to bed and pouts, refusing to eat. Seriously. But his wife, Queen Jezebel, oh, she has a very different idea about how power should work. She's not going to pout. She decides she's going to use the law itself as a weapon to get them what they want.
She basically goes to Ahab and mocks him, saying, is this really how you act as king over Israel? You can just hear the scorn in her voice. Her philosophy is brutally simple. A king is a king. His will is the law. What's even the point of being a ruler if you can't just take whatever you want?
So Jezebel hatches this brilliant and totally evil scheme. It's a perfect legal takedown that just turns justice completely on its head. First, she makes everything look super religious by proclaiming a public fast. Then, she bribes 2 guys to stand up and publicly accuse Naboth of blasphemy, of cursing God and the king. And under their law, all you needed was 2 witnesses. So just like that, Naboth is found guilty and publicly executed.
Everything was done by the book. Perfectly legal. And just like that, with Naboth out of the picture, the vineyard legally belongs to Ahab. It looks like the powerful have won, right? The system was manipulated, the king got what he wanted. Case closed. But this story is not over. Not by a long shot. Because all of a sudden, the prophet Elijah shows up. He just appears right in front of King Ahab. And he's not coming with an army. He's not coming with a legal argument. Nope. He comes with a message straight from God. A raw, terrifying prophecy that makes it clear a much higher law has been violated.
And that prophecy spelled out the real crime here. It wasn't just the murder. It wasn't even just about stealing the land. The ultimate crime, the thing that triggered divine judgment, was the cynical, twisted perversion of justice itself. They took a system that was designed to protect people and turned it into a weapon for their own greed.
And you know this chilling pattern, using the rules, the procedures, the mechanics of the law to get rid of an innocent person? It's not a one-off thing. In fact, this exact pattern shows up in one of the most famous stories in all of human history.
Just look at the parallels here. It's pretty staggering. Naboth's trial and Jesus' trial. In both cases, the accusation is blasphemy, and it's totally false. In both cases, you have false witnesses, paid liars brought in to make the case. Both trials are presented as completely legal public proceedings, but the real motive behind them is the greed or fear of the people in charge. And the outcome? In both cases, an innocent man is executed by the state.
So when you think about it, the farmers of Yoedo, Naboth standing in his vineyard, Jesus standing before his accusers, all of their stories are pointing to the exact same powerful truth. The whole point of the law is to be a shield for the vulnerable, not a sword for the powerful. These stories are a huge warning sign about what happens when that sacred purpose gets twisted.
And really, that leaves all of us with a question that's just as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. Whether we're talking about a colonial government taking land or an ancient king plotting to get a vineyard, we always have to be asking ourselves, when does the law, the system of rules and procedures, stop being about justice and start being just a tool for greed and power?